The small town of Groveton was never known for much. Tucked away from highways and bustling cities, it was quiet, predictable. So when Emily Burns moved there, hoping to reset her life after a painful divorce, she welcomed the quiet. She rented a modest house on the edge of town, close enough to walk to the grocery store and post office but far enough from neighbors to feel she had some privacy. Privacy was all she wanted. She didn't need company, didn't want curious neighbors probing her life. But something felt off almost immediately. It began subtly, with minor things going missing. A book she'd left on the coffee table one day was gone the next, a scarf she distinctly remembered hanging by the door vanished. At first, she doubted herself. Maybe it was just stress, she thought, the aftermath of a tumultuous year clouding her memory. But then the occurrences became harder to dismiss. One evening, after getting back from a late shift at the bookstore where she worked, Emily found her living room window wide open. She remembered closing it before leaving. Her heart pounded as she checked every room, every closet, but nothing seemed to be missing or disturbed. She was shaken but convinced herself it was just her own error, perhaps an unlocked latch. Then she started noticing the notes. Each note was scrawled in faint, almost childlike handwriting. The first one she found stuck to her mailbox. It read, "I see you." Shivers ran down her spine. Was it some kids playing a prank? But the unsettling feeling that it was something more persisted. 2 days later, another note appeared, this time left on her kitchen counter, even though she was sure she'd locked the door. It read, "Nice house. Too big for one." Each note was more personal, more invasive, and the most disturbing part was that each one seemed to have been placed while she was out. Emily went to the police station. She handed over the notes, expecting concern, action, something. But the officer, Detective Miller, only skimmed through the papers and gave her a sympathetic smile. Without concrete threats or signs of forced entry, they couldn't do much, he said. They advised her to install a security system, maybe even a camera or two, and to be cautious. Feeling trapped and isolated, Emily installed a basic camera system around the perimeter of her house, hoping the sight of them would deter whoever was doing this. For a few days, things were quiet. She began to believe maybe she'd overreacted, maybe it had just been a neighbor's tasteless prank, something that wouldn't happen again. But then, late one night, her phone buzzed with a motion alert. She sat up in bed, staring at the screen. The footage showed a figure, a dark, shadowy outline, standing at her front door, facing the camera. She couldn't make out any features, only the slight tilt of the person's head. The figure seemed to stand there for an eternity before turning and vanishing into the night. The police took her call seriously this time, sending an officer to check the area, but by the time they arrived, there was no one there. She handed over the footage, but without a clear view of the person's face, they had little to go on. She was left feeling helpless, a prisoner in her own home. Emily became more vigilant, rarely leaving the house after dark. Yet, the presence seemed relentless. One night, she woke up to the faint sound of scratching. She held her breath, listening intently. The noise seemed to be coming from her back door. Summoning every ounce of courage, she crept down the stairs, her heart hammering as she reached for the phone to call 911. But as she dialed, the scratching stopped. The police arrived within minutes, finding her shaking at the kitchen table, clutching the phone. They inspected the house but found no signs of entry. She showed them the worn wooden frame of the back door, faint scratch marks evident on the surface. The officers exchanged worried glances, but with no other evidence, they could only offer extra patrols in her area. One evening, as she went to retrieve something from the basement, she noticed an object that shouldn't have been there, a tiny, carved wooden figure sitting on one of the steps. It looked like an old-fashioned child's toy, worn down and dusty, but Emily had never seen it before. Trembling, she picked it up, the rough wood prickling her skin. She'd had enough. She packed a small bag, left the lights on, and drove to a nearby motel for the night. The next morning, Emily went to the police again, insisting they check her home. Detective Miller finally agreed to take a closer look, feeling uneasy about the escalation of events. When they entered the house, they found it as she'd left it, but something on the basement door caught his attention. A faint symbol, barely visible, had been scratched into the wood. Detective Miller's tone changed. He asked if she had any reason to believe someone from her past would have a grudge against her, anyone who would go to such lengths to terrify her. Emily couldn't think of anyone. But the feeling that she was being watched only grew stronger. They set up surveillance, hoping to catch whoever was behind it. For a week, Emily stayed with a friend while the house was monitored. But every night, the camera showed the same thing, a figure standing at her front door, always around midnight, never lingering, never forcing entry. As the days passed, Emily felt herself unraveling. The police had leads but nothing definitive, and her life felt dominated by fear and sleepless nights. Desperate, she decided to stay one last night in the house, hoping to confront her fears head-on. But as midnight approached, her phone buzzed again with a motion alert. She watched, heart pounding, as the figure once more appeared on her doorstep. She dialed 911, unable to take her eyes off the screen. When Detective Miller arrived with backup, they finally managed to catch the intruder, a man, disheveled and unwell, who had been living in an abandoned house a mile away. He had developed an obsession with Emily, finding comfort in knowing her routines, watching her every move, and leaving signs of his presence to keep her within his grasp. His intentions remained a mystery, but his disturbing fixation was all too real. Emily left Groveton after that, trying to rebuild her life. The small town had become a nightmare, a place where she had been watched, followed, haunted in ways that had nothing to do with the supernatural. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her, of someone watching from the shadows. It was a fear she'd carry with her for the rest of her life, a reminder that sometimes, horror isn't hidden in the darkness, it's in plain sight.